I'm Jackie Cohen-Roth, founder, CEO of CannabizMD. CannabizMD is a robust platform, including the website that you're now viewing, as well as our events. In a bit, I'm going to be introducing you to today's CBMD profile, who is part of our upcoming event, the Cannabis Science and Therapeutics Provider Education Forum, which is a now virtual event we're going to be hosting on October 3rd. We're very excited about that program, and I'll certainly be sharing more with you in just a bit. CannabizMD focuses on supporting nascent medical cannabis programs, whether they be within a particular state, multiple states, working with what are known as multi-state operators and MSO, and also we're engaged in some international work as well. These CannabizMD, CBMD video profiles that I've been hosting since the onset of COVID have just been a fantastic opportunity to engage with professionals at the highest level within the medical cannabis industry. These are folks who are scientists, researchers, medical providers, entrepreneurs, owner-operators, as well as regulators and our policy influencers. These are folks who are committed to establishing best practices for today's medical cannabis programs, as well as the future of medical cannabis. I'm excited today to share an interview with Dr. Michelle Shuffett. She is an accomplished healthcare executive, strategist, speaker, and a wellness enthusiast with over 20 years of experience encompassing a unique blend of medical practice, communications, and leadership. She strives to share modern perspectives on cannabis and improve the understanding of the medical cannabis industry. She attended medical school at the University of Kentucky, completed her residency at UCLA, and practiced at Children's Hospital, Los Angeles. She also attended London School of Economics and earned certifications in healthcare economics and quantitative analysis. Dr. Shuffett is moderating the first panel that we are hosting of the day on October 3rd. This is a roundtable where our members are going to be exploring and discussing the clinical and scientific use of medical cannabis. As experts will discuss evidence-based research, science as it relates to medical cannabis, including interactions with the endocannabinoid system, clinical pharmacology, dosing, delivery methods, and therapeutics in integrative care. At this point, we have one PharmD, and as well as a PhD who is focused on some exciting research in the medical cannabis space. I will be sharing more information at the end of this video profile about the forum, which is, again, October 3rd. So welcome to Dr. Shuffett.
Thank you, Jackie. Nice to be here.
Yeah, excited to have you.
Yeah, and I'm really excited about the upcoming panel. It's going to be really fantastic and fabulous to get together a multidisciplinary group of professionals and be able to talk about a lot of those topics, because it'll offer the attendees a series of lenses, a lot of different perspectives on things that we think about every day when it comes to the clinical use of medical cannabis.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, my colleagues and I have been developing what we think is a really outstanding day, where leading off with the keynote from Dr. Rachel Knox, and then the blend, as you said, of we have PharmDs, PhDs, MDs, policy experts, regulators. We have a president of a leading testing lab. So it'll be hopefully very, very engaging. I'm excited.
Absolutely.
So what brought you into the medical cannabis industry with your training, and what's your particular niche within the industry?
Sure. So, my background is in medicine, and I did my residency at UCLA, but I think I always knew that I didn't want to practice medicine. And I oftentimes joke that I'm an MD gone rogue, because I don't do traditional clinical practice. I'm much more focused on education and other aspects of health and healthcare. So throughout my training, I was doing a lot of media and journalism classes and sort of starting to understand the more creative side, if you will, of medicine. And I left practice early on in 2003. And since then, I've sort of built a series of skills for myself across health and healthcare. I started as a medical liaison in the pharmaceutical industry and, ultimately went to what I kind of refer to as the agency side. And that's where I was able to start focusing on medical education, whether it was teaching HCPs about different disease states or products, or learning from those HCPs in order to better understand how to educate. And, cannabis and wellness came into my life about, 5 or 8 years ago, I guess, at this point. And I was working for a health and wellness publisher, and it really sort of opened my eyes and opened a passion for me about wellness versus illness. And I started to think a lot more about yoga and meditation and complementary and alternative therapies and things like that. And I ended up sort of leaping off the cliff and going out on my own. And my first solopreneur activity was actually a yoga and meditation platform. Cannabis, to circle back to the last part of that question, came into my life in a very serendipitous way. It came through a conversation I was having at a cocktail party with a group of like-minded individuals who were very much focused in the wellness space and the fitness space. And we started talking, and there were several common connections that we quickly realized. And next thing you know, I'm having a conversation with someone at Columbia Care, one of the largest MSOs in the United States. And, we kind of went from there. So I've been consulting for them for the last 2.5 years.
It's great. And I would like to ask you some things about that in just a bit. I want to clarify what you mean by agency side. So interesting. Yeah.
The agency side.
I think of either a government agency or a advertising agency. So somewhere in between that.
Yeah. So I'm referring not to the government side. I'm referring to the advertising and media side. So, within the pharmaceutical industry, there's a lot of partner work with agencies, both in the CME space, the certified medical education space, and then also the promotional medical education space. And then the third arm is advertising, if you will. So more traditional pharmaceutical advertising. So I ran the medical sides of medical education companies. So we did promotional medical education for pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah, and jumping into with your experience in the pharmaceutical industry, and that's actually our third roundtable is going to focus on the medical or on the future of medical cannabis. And there's big word tossing about I'm tossing about is pharmaceuticalization of the medical cannabis industry. And so that's, as I see it, the integration of the legacy or historic and current cannabis industry, traditional healthcare, which you come from, certainly the pharmaceutical industry, using their years of experience in the things that you just spoke about. And this is whether it's setting up research, including their research standards, components of the pharmaceutical industry, as well as then the critical need of the integration of technology, which we already are. And it's truly amazing. It's one of the coolest things within the cannabis industry I see is just applications of technology and the necessity to be so quick to pivot regarding whatever testing methods are required to data, so on. So quite honestly, I lost track of my question. Now, bringing back to the pharmaceuticalization of the industry. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm very curious to hear what the panel has to say. Personally speaking, I think there would be a lot of pros and cons to that, and you touched on most of them already. From a pro side, understanding drug development, understanding the regulatory space and what the FDA expects and things like that is super important if things go that direction. on the opposite side, it makes it much more restrictive. So right now, for example, medical cannabis is a state by state experience. So each state has its own list of qualifying conditions. And if you go the route of a highly regulated, nationally regulated space, I would be very curious to see how that could potentially change and what that would mean for the patients who are currently receiving medical cannabis based on the existing rules and regulations within their own state. So I'm very curious to see what your experts have to say on that.
Do you have any comment on, as you spoke to us, every state has a different list, or most states have a different list of qualifying conditions. So presently we have 33 states, Puerto Rico, Washington D.C. that have medical cannabis programs, and some are very tight. Where example, I mean they're transitioning now and increasing their program. But Virginia, for example, I mean they were just so narrowly focused. Um, It'd be really great if the states could engage with each other and say, hey, these are the qualifying conditions that we're going to be using universally. Um, any comment there?
I think globally speaking, if you think about the qualifying conditions across states, there are some common themes. Severe and chronic pain
Mhm.
seems to be pretty common in every state, and don't quote me on that. I haven't memorized the list for every single state, but autoimmune conditions, things that are related to inflammation, tend to be pretty consistent across the lists of qualifying conditions. But I think, from a state's perspective, if they're willing to take the leap and get involved, some states are just quite simply going to be more conservative than others, and it's baby steps. They want to establish a program, achieve success in a smaller number of qualifying conditions before they expand that program. And I don't fault them for that at all, because there's a lot of, I'm sure, frameworks they need to create and establish in order to ensure the safety of the patients that are part of that program. So if that means they start small and then grow, that's great, because at least they started.
Exactly. And that's why, as I spoke about Virginia, a neighboring state to where I am in Maryland, and it is, exciting to see the difference, and particularly with the inclusion of social equity, which is just getting much needed attention and action. That new programs and existing programs are paying attention to that. Maryland was theoretically a leader in that space, but it is frustrating to see how slowly that's moved. Is that we're coming up on a year of when new licenses were to have been announced, and it hasn't happened yet. There's just uh, every state has its complexities, and it's just an incredibly complex industry that I don't think everybody understands the complexity of the regulations that you have to adhere to. This is healthcare, and adherence with the standards for quality patient care, which I think as a clinician you are so well aware of, and that with your education. So what are you doing? We share the focus on education and removing the stigma of including medical cannabis as treatment alternatives for HPC. So what sort of things are you doing in that space?
So in general, my consulting work in cannabis is primarily focused on supporting research efforts and, quite frankly, education through opportunities to speak, opportunities to moderate panels and talk to other folks about it, and just really trying to raise awareness in general. Outside of that, my consulting work is much broader and more about the wellness landscape in general.
Mhm. Yeah, speaking with the wellness, and then I actually had a great conversation yesterday with Dr. John Bott, who's CEO and co-founder of Front Range Biosciences. And we had the research that they are becoming involved in and focused on. And he used the same phrase as you, is that people are interested in wellness today rather than waiting till we get sick. And so with research, are you Tell us about your research, and are you touching upon that as well as that integral to what you're doing and the projects you're part of?
The research projects I'm working on right now aren't focused on wellness per se. Um, I love that because, and I think we're going to learn a lot about that at the meeting when the experts talk about the endocannabinoid system, for example. That's something that was discovered, about 25 years ago. It's not something that's well understood, but the more and more we learn about it, the more we understand what role it plays in so many aspects of our lives and our health and quite frankly the wellness aspect, because it does create homeostasis for your body. And I think a lot of people in the wellness space are trying to understand it from the perspective of, are there certain people that are perhaps deficient in certain endocannabinoids,
Right.
and replacing those with cannabis could perhaps be helpful, and again create that balance, that homeostasis from a wellness perspective. So I think that's going to be really fascinating, and we'll have to make sure that those panelists get probed on that topic at the event on October 3rd. My my specific research most recently is actually related to dosing, and it's related to metabolism. So one of the
I'm sorry,
things,
related dosing, and I'm sorry, what else?
it's related to dosing and metabolism. So one of the things that, one of the projects I've been working on with Columbia Care, which we presented at the ICR meeting last week, which was a virtual meeting hosted by the University of Colorado. And one of the things we noticed within the New York population is that there were a group of people that were what we called high daily dose users, and a group of people that were low daily dose users. So these folks might have the same conditions, and they, in theory, we believed, had the same level of satisfaction with the therapy that they were getting, but the dose that they were taking on a daily basis from a total endocannabinoid perspective was vastly different. So we bucketed them in two categories. The low group was less than 10 milligrams per day of total cannabinoids, and the other group, the higher group, was 50 or more per day. And what we hypothesized is that these folks must have some sort of different metabolism, some sort of genetic differences that make them high metabolizers or low metabolizers, and perhaps that's why that difference exists. So what we did is we did some genetic testing. We obtained DNA samples and we sent them to a lab. And what we're looking for in those lab results, the SNPs, if you will, are particular SNPs that are associated with metabolic cytochrome P450 groups that lead to different metabolic phenotypes. So to sort of translate that in the most simplest way, do you have a certain genetic profile or makeup that means you metabolize medical cannabis very quickly? And if you metabolize it very quickly, you're going to need a higher dose. And we wanted to better understand that and see if that hypothesis could potentially hold true. So we unfortunately haven't been able to complete the DNA results yet because of COVID-19 delays, to be quite honest. So the lab hasn't been able to provide the final results from the SNPs. So I'm still excited to find out what that aspect of it shows. But the first part of the hypothesis did come out as true. Both groups were equally satisfied with their therapy despite the diverse dosing differences. So as soon as we get the results from the DNA samples, we'll be able to understand, is there a correlation with that metabolic profile as well that leads to that? And you might be thinking, why do we care about this? Why does this matter? Well, it matters from a dosing perspective and in some ways a cost perspective for patients, because right now, and this is a question I'm going to ask my panelists, how do you approach dosing, and what do you think about when you're dosing a patient? And there's a lot of things that I know HCPs think about and consider, but are you considering things like metabolic profiles and DNA variations? Because if, let's say you come in and you get a recommendation for medical cannabis, if I know what your profile is, I can more accurately get you to the dose you need to be at much more quickly which means you'll spend less money trying to figure that out. So there's a lot of, I think, more practical implications of the work that we're doing. So hopefully we'll have some more information there. But it was very exciting to at least present the preliminary results last week.
That is, yeah, looking forward to hearing more. And I just want to clarify. So, Dr. Vaught, it wasn't that they're focused on wellness, but that's a discussion that we had. So, yeah, they're doing some really cool stuff, looking at developing specific cultivars or developing cultivars that are stronger in. We've got these so many new that are becoming discovered, the cannabinoids. And so research is that it hasn't moved fast enough. I mean, we have talking about the federal regulations, and that's, I think, maybe the biggest challenge to the industry, aside from the banking issue, but that we're just ham-hocked by the lack of ability to complete these studies and access to cannabis that patients are actually using, not the stuff that's coming from University of Mississippi. But where I wanted to go, and this was a conversation that he and I had, is his focus as well, personalized medicine, which is essentially what you're speaking of, that the research is leading to. And the challenge is absolutely spot on with the dosing. Everybody's endocannabinoid system is different. I have colleagues that, we've shared our stories as personal stories as medical cannabis patients. So somebody who I know is very tiny, and the milligrams that she doses per day compared to a guy that's well over 6'2", and his dosing, you would think like, oh, he's a big guy, he can take it all, but absolutely, it's the flip on that one. So lots, it's very exciting that personalized medicine in of itself, and then integrating medical cannabis to be part of that. And as you said, metabolism, DNA, and all these variables. That's exciting.
Yeah.
So I'm going to wrap this up, and very much looking forward to have you moderate this panel, the discussion that you're going to lead, including this personalized medicine. One of the biggest challenges we've spoken about to HPCs is the dosing. So prior to the event, if anybody has questions for you, wants to connect with you, and would like more information on this research that you've been part of with Communicator, what's the best way to do that?
Email is always best, and I'm happy to share any of the results we have so far that we've shared in the abstract. And the presentation is actually available on the ICR website. So
would you share that right now, the RCR website? Do you have that address off the top of your head? You can certainly add that. No. Okay. Okay.
And I'm not even sure, honestly, if I don't know if they're doing full access yet, or if you still have to be within the people who paid to go to the program. But the abstract is freely available.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, well, we will see you on October 3rd, CannabizMD, Cannabis Science and Therapeutics, Provider Education Forum. Details will follow at the end of the video, and also are on the home page and a separate page under events, but CannabizMD.com. Thanks so much, Dr. Shuffett, and talk to you soon.
Thank you, Jackie. I'm very much looking forward to it. It's going to be a lot of fun to challenge some of the common beliefs out there and get some more modern perspectives from the panelists.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Have a good one.